Hello and welcome to the Sales Leader Series. I'm your host, Freddie, where I'll be gathering B2B SaaS sales leaders from across the world to answer 5 short, topical B2B SaaS sales questions. These questions are going to be the same each week, bar one, giving you insight and different perspectives into how top performers within the industry think, as well as actionable advice you guys can use in your own selling careers. This week on the Sales Leader Series, I'm joined by Sam Jacobs. For those of you that don't already know, Sam is the CEO and founder of Pavilion, the leading center providing peer-to-peer connection, training and development, and career resources for high-growth professionals around the world. Having held many senior vice president and chief revenue officer roles himself, Sam has become one of the most influential and respected voices on software, sales, leadership within the industry. Alongside Pavilion, he's also the host of the Sales Hacker podcast, a show featuring interviews and discussions with leading sales practitioners, and also advises on many different boards as a board member for various different companies. Sam, really appreciate you taking the time to chat.
I'm happy to be here. Yeah, excited.
Amazing. I think one of the most appropriate places to start this conversation that I was excited to kind of ask you going into this is you're probably one of the most well-connected individuals amongst CROs, revenue leaders, sales leaders across, specifically looking at software. And since the start of 2022, and this has kind of been a theme for some of the conversations that I've had with previous sales leaders, is that the software market, and I'm generalizing here, has been bleak, particularly for sales teams and leaders. Thinking about this year alone, and as we look into 2024 and putting those, 2021, 2022 behind us, what would you say CROs and VPs of sales are worried about most going into 2024?
Well, thanks, Freddie. The short answer is their jobs, and the longer answer is, here's the situation that we're in. We all know what happened over the course of 2021 and maybe the beginning of 2022, but really the peak of the market was November of 2021. And it was very, very low interest rates, in fact, 0%, leading to massive money supply, leading to lots of people getting funding. And there's so much data about the explosion just in the number of companies. I think G2 presented and has some data that there were something like 50,000 software companies in 2018, and now there's 125,000 that are listed on G2. That's just listed on G2. So there's been a massive explosion of the number of companies, all of whom received, funding and financing, but many of whom were designed and organized for a low interest rate environment, meaning lots of STRs and AEs, people buying things. And as the central banks of the world raised interest rates, that with the explicit intention of not just stopping inflation, but actually slowing down the economy, it worked in the sense that markets are down, interest rates are at about 5%, and that had a massively chilling effect on the venture capital community and on the software industry writ large. And this year has been a really tough year. Now, at the beginning of the year and really through maybe the summer, people were hopeful that this year would be the end of it. And maybe that, there were a massive amount of layoffs, particularly in the first half of 2023. And more shutdowns, more company shutdowns than we've seen in any year prior for at least the last couple of years. So people were hoping, well, this will be the end. And if I can make it to January of 2024, everything will be over. But the guidance we're receiving from central banks and really what we see in the economy and from the financing environment is that this current situation, whatever it is probably going to last through 2024 and possibly into the first quarter of 2025. Now, there might be, we're never certain, but what is this current situation? This current situation is that the very, very best companies are still getting funding and financing at good valuations, but all of the companies that are not the very, very best are not really fundable right now. If you're growing 30 or 40%, but you're burning 2 million, you're burning massive amounts of capital, that might not be sufficient, because even if you're growing quickly, if you're completely inefficient in terms of how you allocate dollars, you still might not be fundable. And if you're not fundable and you're running out of money, you've got a very tricky situation on your hands. And that's why there's been so many shutdowns. So where does that leave us for CROs and people that are running revenue organizations? They're in a tough spot. And the reason that they're in a tough spot is because we are in the last period of capitulation. What do I mean by capitulation? We're in the last period where CEOs and founders have been unwilling to admit that their companies are not worth as much as they thought because they still had money on their balance sheet. And we're entering a period where they do not have, where they're running out of money and they're going to have to raise. And I've talked to a number of CEOs myself that are having to raise in Q1. Well, the raise in Q1, everybody is really focused on having a massive Q4. And it's that desperation and anxiety that is permeating throughout the revenue community, right? Because everybody feels like I got to hit the numbers or I can't raise. And the reality is to raise, you're not just going to have to hit the numbers, you're going to have to put up even bigger numbers for 2024. So, meanwhile, what's the data that we have on how effective sales teams are? Well, they're less effective than they've ever been, at least in the last 10 years, right? Deal sizes are shrinking. They went up a little bit from Q2 to Q3, but generally speaking, they're down 17% year over year. Sales cycles are extending. CAC payback period, meaning how quickly a company gets its money back from an investment in sales and marketing, for publicly traded SaaS businesses has stretched to 48 months, which means 4 years, which means that if you put a dollar in at the top of into the machine on January 1st, 2023, you don't get that money back until 2027. And that's fundamentally unsustainable, right? And couple all of that with high interest rates, and you're facing a very, very difficult situation. And so it's not that business isn't happening. It's not that people aren't buying things. People are buying things. But remember, there's 3 times more companies than there were a couple of years ago. They're not buying enough stuff to make up for 3 times more companies. And so the reality is that CROs and VP of sales, what should they do? What they should do is be effective allocators of capital. They should really work with the CFO and the CEO to not set inordinately aggressive revenue targets. They could possibly even plan for no growth at all in 2024. Although, again, anybody listening to this will say that's not an option for me, and I understand that. And what they should do is work to get as efficient as possible. And unfortunately, getting as efficient as possible might mean a smaller team. It might mean a smaller tech stack, but it means this is not the time to be hiring 10 SDRs and 20 AEs and crossing your fingers, hoping that something good will happen. That's not going to work. Meanwhile, long answer, but meanwhile, the entire efficacy of the SDR function is declining. Outreach, SalesLoft, Gong, every automation platform, HubSpot has an email sequencing tool. More people are getting emails. The role of the SDR is being called into question. Doesn't mean outbound doesn't work. It means outbound, and this is another piece of data that I have for your listeners. Outbound is 4 times harder than it was 18 months, I think 3 years ago, 4 years ago. Jeremy Donovan has the data. And think about that. Outbound's 4 times harder. What does that mean? That means you can work 4 times as hard as you did 4 years ago and get the same result, That means if you're doing dials, you have to make 400 calls when it took 100 calls. And we're not equipped to do 400 calls. So I can tell you that the old playbook is not going to work in 2024, and that you're going to have to get lean. You're going to have to keep your head down and really plan for efficient growth. That's what I would say.
And I know, obviously, rising interest rates is not only software, specific, but across all different industries. But I'm curious to get your thoughts on, do you think the difficulty in obviously maintaining some of those sales numbers that we were previously seeing and all of that money sloshing around in VC and venture funds previously, is that a sign of obviously the software industry getting a little bit too dependent on just selling to other software companies? Or is that more of a reflection of there's just not enough value being created within these software companies? I mean, where do you see that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think you're right. I think a lot of software companies were selling to other software companies. I think Pavilion was selling to venture backed companies that had lots of money, and we've taken a hit too because people have less money. And I think the companies that intentionally index to non software are doing much, much better. And I was on, because I do a podcast. I don't do the Sales Hacker podcast. It's actually called Top Line, but I do it with AJ Bruno, who's the CEO of QuotaPath. They sell sales commission planning software. So what are their high growth categories? This is as of last night. Their high growth categories are roofing companies and building maintenance companies, right? Not tech companies. And there's lots and lots of salespeople that need commission software out there that are not tech. But I think a lot of people, it was this incestuous cycle where you were selling back to each other and thinking that that was real and that you had real customers. And I think Unfortunately, the shakeout reality is that it wasn't, well, it's not that it wasn't real. There's like this morality tale that comes into play that I find it's not as useful. There's no good guys and bad guys or good girls and bad girls, right? This is not about heroes and villains. This is just about a different market. That's all. It's a different market. In a different market with 0% interest rates where everybody's getting rich, yeah, it's freaking great. It's awesome. That's not the market we live in. And it's going to require a different kind of business with a different kind of valuation.
It's not always great to start off and kick off a conversation with all of the pessimistic points about where we are at today, but I think obviously it's appropriate. Flip side, if at all, are you hearing anything that CROs, VPs are actually optimistic about in 2024?
Well, I would, here's what I would say. There's still great products out there. There are still great products out there, and the bar is higher. But I think if you have a great product, I still see companies doing great. There's my friend Asad Zaman, who's the CEO of a recruitment firm, told me about a company, 130% net revenue retention, probably going to triple next year and go from like 10 to 30 in terms of annual recurring revenue. There are definitely companies that are doing well. So that's one point of optimism. I would say it's also, if you can keep your job, if you can keep your head down, I would also say that there's never been a better time to start your own business. Now, there is like a massively, there's all kinds of things, right? Like the market is shifting. So there's more fractional CROs than has ever been in the past because people are finding it more and more difficult to keep a job at these kinds of high growth companies. And so everybody's going out on their own doing consulting. I think that's a great thing. I also think that's an opportunity for somebody to start a business. There's something around some kind of contract sales workforce. There's probably tools that are specific to fragmented organizations that have high levels of contract workers as opposed to full time workers. I think it's never been a better time to start your own business. I guess the other piece of optimism I would say is it's I mean, I hate to say this, but I don't, because who knows, right? But I would say it would be hard for me to see it getting worse, right? It would be hard for me. We see some green shoots. Q3 was better than Q2. My friend AJ just had the biggest, they're having the best quarter and they're going to have the best 2 quarters of the company's history over the second half of 2023. And we just got today, we're recording this, at the beginning of November, we got a middling, not a great jobs report in the US and unemployment ticked up. Everybody's a macroeconomist now. Why do we care? Why we care is because we were waiting for the sign that the pain is over and that the Fed might start lowering interest rates. And we're heading into an election year in the US again, but the US is a big part of the global economy, obviously. We're heading into an election year and we're going to have to pay for all of the financial and military aid that we're sending to the Middle East and to the Ukraine. And all of that might require us to print even more money. Now, all of that will be good for us as software companies, lowered interest rates, higher money supply. It's bad for, I think it's bad for us as a global population because we're saddling ourselves up with generations and generations of debt. But I do think it would be hard for me to see it getting much worse in 2024, which means that it probably can only get better. So if you've managed to survive this long, don't give up now.
It's great advice for those CROs or at least people in those kind of leadership roles. And you're right. I mean, I guess it's a great opportunity to obviously start and do your own thing. But for those that obviously don't want to do that, right, and they want to stick around, they want to be, one of those leaders within these different software companies. Based on a bunch of the things that you just mentioned there, I mean, where do you think they should be prioritizing their time, right? Thinking about all of these other different macroeconomic factors that play into their role and obviously their company. I mean, what should they be prioritizing, specifically looking at maintaining or growing the sales function?
I think they should be prioritizing enabling their very best sellers. That's which sounds easy, but one of the things that's changed is rep efficiency. Rep efficiency has gone up recently. Why is that? It's because a smaller number of reps are getting more leads because the lower performing folks are out of work. So I think triple down on your most efficient channels. And what does that mean? That means I would, so And, like any executive, right? You have to live both in the present and in the future. So if you're living in the present, that means figure out what's working and do more. I mean, this sounds completely obvious, but it's surprising how few people do it. Figure out what's working and stop doing the things that work less well. So my point is, what are the things, and then also think about efficiency. So what does that mean? That means that look at your outbound really diligently and really figure out if outbound is working for you. I don't mean working like we get some opportunities. I'm talking about the efficiency. Efficiency means dollars in versus dollars out. It means where are our cheapest and best opportunities coming from? And then invest in those channels. I'll give you a specific example for Pavilion. Where are our best opportunity? We just did this big conference in Nashville, Tennessee. Adam wasn't there, but I ran with him in Seattle. But that was the road to Nashville. This event in Nashville was a huge success, right? Why was it a huge success? Well, guess what? We didn't do it alone. We did it with Winning by Design, a really well-known consulting firm. We did it with Insight Partners, one of the largest growth equity software investor in the world. We did it with Marlin Equity Partners. We did it with a company called Arbinger Institute. So the point is, we did it through partnerships, right? And Insight Partners alone got 100 people to come to our GTM summit. So my point is, partnership for us is a really powerful channel that we're really, really focused on. And we are less focused on, we don't do outbound. We have lots of inbound and we're trying to optimize inbound, but we're not doing outbound. Now, again, that's just because we're looking at cost efficiency of channels. So what should you be doing? What should you be thinking if you're a VP of sales leader out there? Here's what you should not be doing. You should not be going to your CFO and saying, I need 10 more SDRs, right? You need to be very, very prudent about your hiring investments. And you need to be looking at other potential channels where you can get leads cheaply. And that might be content like this podcast. That might be partnerships. I don't think it's going to be quote unquote product led growth if you currently don't have that motion because it's a massive engineering investment. But generally speaking, that's what I think.
And going back to the previous point that you mentioned there, and one of the reasons I want to ask you this is I was lucky enough to come to the Pavilion event in London. I think that was back in, correct me if I'm wrong, July-ish time. And one of the big themes that I was hearing from that event was the need for CROs and sales leaders to reproduce processes that tell their sales team, no, you need to be doing this. If your top sales reps, right, aren't following the process
Right.
that you have implemented, right, which is some of the things that I was hearing at that
Right.
conference, that summit, saying like, you need to follow these processes. We've got to implement these processes. But if your top reps aren't doing that and they're driving 80% of the revenue, I mean, what are the type of conversations that you would say to those sales leaders to have? I mean, how did you get around that situation?
That's very difficult. I don't have a great answer for you. I think, listen, how do you convince anybody of anything, right? One of the ways is you make it their idea. The other way is you try to not make it about me versus you. It's not me, the annoying boss, telling you to put your information into Salesforce. It's me saying the data indicates that if you adhere to the Medic process and you use Medic and you fill out all the fields, that you have a higher win rate. So don't you want to make more money? That might be one way. And then finally, I would say automation, AI. There's a lot of tools that are being built. I think Win AI is such an example. They were actually at at the CRO summit in London. They were smashing the keyboards. They had me smash that keyboard. And my point is, how do you get around it? Is maybe, I mean, the idea, because the other data point, by the way, is that reps are spending more of their time than ever doing admin activities and less of their time than ever selling. And so I think the answer is, hey, use platforms that plug into Zoom that do automatic transcription and automatically update your CRM. Like make it so that following the process happens in the natural course of their selling and of course, all of these companies, like, I don't even know all the companies, but all of the companies that do in conversation real-time prompts that present playbooks and data as you're talking, because again, they're transcribing in real time, listening in real time, and then giving you like, what you got to do is meet the reps where they are so that it's not, hey, fill out all this information after you've done all of the hard work. And I think that's where AI can play a massive role in increasing the productivity. And my guess is yes, like, I don't think it's going to be systemic, right? My guess is that your best rep is probably, well, you might disagree, but your best rep is probably the one that knows how to use AI the best, or he will be, or she will be in 6 months.
Makes sense. taking a bit of a turn here. And this is something that I ask everyone that we get on this show, and you can be as specific as you would like. This question: you've been in sales for a number of years and obviously held SVP roles and CRO roles yourself, and also obviously founding Pavilion, right? What has been the toughest moment in your career if you had to choose one? And for those going through, if they are going through something similar, what advice would you give those individuals?
I am emerging from the toughest part of my career. So, but l- I would say leading up to 2021, the toughest part of my career was also the best part of my career. I mean, the single hardest day was probably in 2014 when I was fired from this company, Axial, and I led 60 people. There were 90 people at the company, so I led 2/3 of the people at the company. But I tried to get the CEO fired. So if you come at the king, you best not miss, you know? So it didn't work. He found out and he fired me, as he should have. He should have fired me. And and then, one thing led to the other. So what advice do I give? I guess and then honestly, we raised money 2 years ago. I didn't spend it particularly well, and this year has been a really hard year being CEO of Pavilion, even though Pavilion is by far the best community out there, by far. And we've got the best relationships and the best partnerships, but we're not growing at the rate that we grew at in 2021. No surprise, right? Given everything we've been talking about. So what's the advice that I have? I have a couple pieces of advice. First of all, there's some level of stoicism, right? You just got to, like, the obstacle is the way. You got to lean into it. You got to lean into the difficulty. You got to remind yourself that you will be grateful. You will be grateful for the setback, right? Everybody wants the setbacks to already have happened. You want to tell the story that it used to happen, but now I'm perfect. And you never want to believe that you're in the middle of the setback. And I understand that. And that means that every setback is painful, even though you know the right thing to do. But what I would share with you is you really have to understand that you're on a journey and that all of these setbacks, they will lead you somewhere if you let them. If you use it as a moment for growth, right? So for what's my example? I got fired in 2017 and I said I am done working for these people being young inexperienced founders, and I'm going to build my own company. And so I started consulting, and that's when I started charging for Pavilion, and I sold some sponsorships for Pavilion. And all of a sudden, I had proven to myself that I was capable of making money. And that was really, really powerful. And so I used that as an opportunity to force myself to grow. And all of this discomfort will force yourself to grow. Last thing I will say, I could talk about this at great length for a long time, but I would listen to the Audible book, The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. Um, because in these moments of fear and anxiety, your brain takes over, right? And you start panicking, or at least I do, right? When things are going poorly and I'm worried, and especially if you're CEO or founder, you start catastrophizing. You're like, oh my God, I'm going to go out of business. I'm going to be out on the street. I'm going to be homeless. I'm going to lose everything I worked so hard for. And you have to realize that almost all of reality, I mean, the only thing that's real is now. I know that it sounds cliche, but it's really, really true. And it helps to think about it. Right now in this moment, I'm sitting at my living room, in my dining room in my nice house. Everything's perfectly fine. Now there's a lot of shit going on in my life right now, I can tell you. A lot, and especially on this particular day. But the reality is it's a beautiful day. That's the reality, and I got 3 stupid sleeping dogs near me, and they don't do anything, and they're completely lazy, but I love them anyway. So I got 3 beautiful dogs. I'm in a beautiful home. Everything's fine. It really is. It really is fine. And, you have to remind yourself of that because so much of the story, he does a better job of explaining it, but the bottom line is that your brain and your mind is a disease that has an incentive in not letting you be present. Because if you're present, your mind doesn't have a role to play. And if you're not present, meaning you're thinking about the future, you're thinking about the past, you're regretting what happened, you're saying, what an idiot I am, you're scared of what might happen. That's just a way of keeping you out of this moment. So, my advice is listen to that audiobook and try to be present because it really does help.
Great advice. And obviously, it goes without saying, for anyone listening or watching this podcast, we'll have a bunch of show notes where you can find that audiobook or hard copy down below in the show notes. Taking you a bit of a turn here. And one of the reasons I want to ask you this question, Sam, is Adam actually mentioned that you had a similar conversation with him about this. And I'm actually really curious to get your opinion on this. And obviously, some of the things that we've mentioned already in this conversation, 2021, great year. And then obviously moving into 2022, rising interest rates, all of those other different macroeconomic factors that created the situation we're in today. A lot of companies that I've seen at least have broken up their offering into different modular parts to try and, at least lower the barrier for other people to kind of, buy their product or whatever. And that is also, you could say the same about lowering prices in general to offset that poor demand. Looking towards, I guess, the future, next 5 to 10 years, whatever range you want to use, how do you think the software industry in general and software companies will change their pricing models? Is that going to be somewhat similar to what we've seen over the last couple of years? Or, I'll leave the floor to you.
I think they will change. And I think, by the way, if you're out there on LinkedIn and you see somebody say the golden age of SaaS is over, I said that first. That was my phrase, you bastards. Everybody's stealing it. But anyway, I don't think everybody wants to be in a subscription. So there's a lot of benefits to being in a subscription. The benefits are you're completely aligned with your buyer. The vendor, the seller and the buyer are completely aligned, right? For you to keep buying, I got to keep providing service. And it's way cheaper for you to rent the service on an ongoing basis than it is to buy it new every time or to build it yourself, right? SaaS came from the fact that like everybody was building their own data centers and hosting their own stuff, and it's just way cheaper when you just rent it from AWS than when you have to buy your own data center. And it's way cheaper when you don't have to install the software and when you can just here's a login to Salesforce. And Salesforce was of course the first great cloud company enabled by AWS. But the point is, that's not how everybody wants to be and how to live. And I think companies, and I've seen this personally at other companies, right? I used to work at a company called GLG, and it used to be, and by the way, it came of age in 2003, 2004 during a difficult economy, but they were selling drugs to drug addicts. We were selling access to experts to investors during the golden age of hedge funds. And we had a great pricing model, and that company was so incredibly profitable. And we would charge 60 grand every 6 months. We would charge in 6-month increments. So the average deal size was $250,000. And by the way, I was 25, 26 years old, and I was clipping, and it wasn't even anything. We didn't even think about it. We're just like, oh yeah, of course they have $250,000 to spend. So that company went from 26 to 53, all the way up to 280 in ARR over the years that I was there, and all the while massively profitable. But what happened? What happened was that other competitors came in and they said, why don't you just buy it on a per call? Because it was phone calls to experts. Why don't you just buy it on a per call basis, which is the unbundling that you're talking about, right? And no, we didn't want that to happen because the bundling was a great business model for us. But competitive pressure forced the unbundling of the per call basis. And I'm sure that there are expert networks out there right now that sell on a per call basis. You can still probably buy a bundle for cheaper. But my point is that I don't think everybody wants a subscription. That's what the other anecdote I'll share with you is this. I used to work at Livestream, and I was an incoming VP of sales, and looked at their data, and they had thousands and thousands of leads every month, and it was really incredible. And they didn't really have a sales team. It was all completely inbound. And I thought, oh my God, there's all this free money like lying on the ground. We'll just start running some demand gen campaigns against these leads. And then when I got there, I hired a big sales team, and I realized two things. The first thing is that many of the leads were clicking on a link that said powered by Livestream in a stream that they were watching from somebody else, but they were just audience members. They weren't buyers of anything. And the second thing was that some of the people that were leads weren't really leads. They were buying monthly subscriptions and churning out at a high rate. But what were they really doing? What they were doing is signing up for the monthly plan to shoot an event on video and live stream it like a bar mitzvah or a wedding or something like that. And then they would immediately cancel the plan. So what is the point? The point is Livestream can call that ARR or MRR, but that's not what it was. They were buying a one-time license to do one event. So I guess the point is you can call it whatever you want, but ultimately businesses are going to emerge that are going to sell things to people the way that people want to buy them.
Yep. Do you think in general that will mean tech stacks will swell because they're almost picking out different smaller parts and different modules, if you will, from all these different other companies, say when and if they need it, right?
I think there's going to be an empty middle. I think there's going to be a few oligopolies at the top HubSpot, Clearbit, Salesforce. There's going to be a few big companies that are going to consolidate. They're going to buy up all these companies, and and many of the companies that we thought were buyers are probably going to be sellers. So Outreach, SalesLoft, Gong might be sellers more than buyers, right? They might not be the platform. They might be acquired by Salesforce, acquired by Oracle, acquired by Adobe, whomever. And then I think there's going to be innumerable, so many, beyond numbers, small little software companies started by you and me, because we can build a cheap little business using AI and using, it's never been easier to learn to code. It's never been easier to learn how to build something interesting, because you can use ChatGPT and Bard you can literally, within the next couple of months, if not a year, you'll say, write me a software program that does these things, and it will do it. And so what does that mean? That means lots of people are going to have their own software. I don't even know what the example would be from other, maybe it's books. I don't even know, but I know that there's going to be lots and lots of small software vendors, and there's going to be a few people at the very top. And I think the challenge is the people in the middle that have raised lots and lots of money, but really can't afford the go-to-market motion that they've designed based on how inefficient it is.
Makes sense. This is the final question I had for you, Sam. Final topic, and this is actually a question from our previous guest, Craig Siglin-Paglia. He's VP of Sales at Quantified out in New York, and he asks you, and this is a question focused on kind of Pavilion and the role of sales communities in the future. Knowing that the landscape of sales has changed dramatically over the past several years, how do you envision the role of sales support communities changing in order to keep up with that new landscape we're selling in, but also in general? I mean, how do you see sales support communities changing?
I think they're going to be more important than ever. I think that the playbook is a combination of structured education plus community plus relationships, right? Like access, right? Like you join Pavilion because you know that we're aligned with Insight partners and we're aligned with the best investors. And you're not going to get access to Insight if you join Rev Genius, or whatever the other communities are. You're just not. It's not a knock on them. It's like we've established the brand. I think it's, in many ways, Pavilion is like the Harvard of go-to-market. But the broader point I would make is, but that doesn't mean that there's not a Yale, and that doesn't mean that there's not a SUNY Geneseo, State University of New York, if you're in London, or a Queen's College or a London School of Economics. There's lots and lots. There's going to be lots and lots of communities, and I think that they're going to be so important because none of us are going to have any job security. You're not going to be able to go to ADP or Oracle or Salesforce and know that you get to work there for 20 years. You're going to have to find your own way, and it's going to be a scary world. And we're all going to have to come together to support each other. And so I think the future of sales communities is going to look like the freelancers union. It's going to look like guilds. It's going to look like places where you go to get trained and you go to find your peers and you go to be mentored and apprentice. And hopefully that equips you. Even if you suck, it's still better than the alternative of being on your own.
Yep, completely agree. Sam, look, they were all of the questions that I had for you today. That anyone listening or watching this podcast, as mentioned, there'll be a bunch of links in the show description about Sam, Pavilion, and all the other things that we mentioned in this podcast today. Before I let you go, Sam, is there anything that you would like to leave the audience with, whether they are a SDR, CRO, CEO, anything that comes to mind?
The main thing I would share, which of course, as we say in the States, I'm talking my book, but I just don't think now is the time to go it alone. No matter who you are, only people, if you were tired, have had multiple exits, if you were CEO of Datadog or CEO of whatever, Klaviyo, I forget his name. Yeah, sure, retire. You know it all. Good for you. Everybody else, you're going to need a tribe. You're going to need a group of people to figure out how to do this. And it's not going to be the people in Marleybone that you're sitting next to that are just the other SDRs, that it's also their first job. You're going to have to find a group of people, some kind of organized community. It doesn't have to be us. We're the best, but you got to find somebody because it's a challenging world and you're going to need tools to address it.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Sam. And for all those listening, we'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.